Story 1. Bro, I'm jobless living off spam and rice, while the ball cock assembly, an actual thing not being funny, is rusted through, causing it to stick. I've lost count of how many clogs I have had this month. Story 2. I do not know the total, but at least once every few months. It depends on what I ate and how much fiber is in me, thus keeping everything intact and causing clogging. Story 3. Enough times to learn some tips, I guess. Professional tip. 5 seconds of dedicated flushing will solve most, but not all situations. Professional tip 2. Always invest in a good plunger that is proper for a toilet, not a sink plunger. Story 4. Maybe once a year. My brother, on the other hand, clogged our toilet every time he used it. It was the toilet advertised to flush an entire bucket of golf balls. He had to buy us a special plunger because the one we had was not strong enough to unclog it. Story 5. A few. The worst was in a boutique hotel. I tried to solve it on my own but couldn't, so I had to ask the owner to unclog it while my partner enjoyed watching me die inside. Story 6. Wait, please don't tell me that defecating so violently that your toilet breaks is a normal experience in the United States. Why are you all agreeing? Please stop. Story 7. Once a week. I am depressed about it but know what to do. I am pleased that I do not have constipation often. Could be worse. Story 8. With poop. Never. When I was a child, I caused the toilet to overflow by stuffing it with a large amount of toilet paper. Oh, to be 2 years old again. Story 9. Like 100. One time, without even toilet paper, the plumber had to be called. Also, if you are reading this, the only place your plunger should be is right next to your toilet. Not in your attic, not in your shed, not in your closet, and especially not in a store yet to be purchased. If you do not have one there, that is your responsibility at this point. Story 10. One of the first times I stayed over at my girlfriend's place, I clogged the toilet. We were watching television, and she fell asleep. I thought, perfect opportunity to use the bathroom. I did my business, and it was a large deposit. I knew it was going to clog. I flushed anyway. Clogged. She didn't have a plunger. I was in panic mode. The toilet was full of dirty water with a large obstruction floating. I washed my hands and went back out. She was still asleep. I let it sit, hoping it would soften and go down after a while. About an hour later, the water level returned to normal. I flushed again, hoping it was softer. Still clogged. I decided to tell her. I woke her up and said I clogged the toilet. She was half asleep and didn't fully understand, then went back to sleep. Later, when she got up to use the bathroom, I told her it was still clogged. She finally understood. Luckily, she has roommates and they all have their own bathrooms. She borrowed a plunger, and I took care of it before she could use the bathroom. I bought her a plunger the next time I came over. I haven't had to use it since. That was the last time I clogged a toilet. Story 11. Most days, I am a big man with massive bowel movements. It takes about a quarter roll of toilet paper just to clean myself. Story 12. I have never clogged a toilet. I live in a country with well-developed and functional plumbing. In fact, the only time I have seen a clogged toilet was during the 3 months I lived in the United States in the early 2010s. The toilet in the house I stayed in clogged twice, but neither time was my fault. That visit made me realize why plungers are such a ubiquitous item in United States popular culture. Story 13. Intentionally? 0. Unintentionally? A few times when I was younger and did not think about flushing halfway through, Story 14. Bro, I have known that for a long time. 2 main issues. 1. I grew up in an old house, so the pipes were not that great. I used to use 7 or 8 sheets per wipe. Story 15. I wouldn't say it happens weekly, but it is at least once a month. Some of us are not familiar with toilets that use a strong water jet to flush waste down the pipe. Story 16. Probably a dozen or so. I feel like the quality of the toilet and water pressure have the biggest impact. I don't care how big your bowel movement is, it won't clog like an airport toilet. Story 17. More times than I can count when I was seriously losing weight and eating almost nothing but protein, but never anything that could not be resolved with a good plunger. Story 18. Since work has this eco-toilet that saves water and uses a vacuum, just about every other time I use it, it flushes 10 times before I need to use the brush. It is shaped in a way that causes waste to land right on the porcelain, and then I need to manually pump to make it flush properly. Story 19. I recently discovered that I am responsible for far fewer clogs than I had thought. For about a decade, I had to clear a clog once or twice a month in my master bathroom. Only my then-wife and I used that toilet, so the suspect list was short. After we separated, however, the toilet mysteriously stopped clogging. Turns out my ex refused to dispose of tampons in the trash, instead flushing them and damaging my toilet. Story 20. I do not keep count, but it is more than a dozen. Just yesterday, it was avoided by Costco having industrial-grade supplies in their restroom. Story 21. Once, it was the last day of my trip in Mexico. We were literally on our way out with an hour before we left. Sorry to the maid who discovered that. Story 22. Do people not know that you are allowed multiple flushes per visit? If you can physically feel that it is a lot, why not just give it a flush before wiping and adding toilet paper to the already full bowl? I am not sure why people have not learned this simple trick. Story 23. I went on a short mission trip for my church for a week. I arrived on Monday, and the missionaries I was staying with took me shopping. I only bought bread, peanut butter, and milk. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for 4 days and did not notice that I had not gone to the bathroom in 3 days. At the end of the 4th day, I had to go. I swear I passed a huge stool. It was touching the bottom of the seat and sticking out. A knife would have been proud to cut that. I did what any sensible teenager would do. I flushed it and walked away. The water came up and overflowed, and the worst part was that it was a second-floor apartment. The woman downstairs came up to knock on our door because the water flowed down to her apartment. That was the last time I had a peanut butter sandwich. Story 24. Enough to completely avoid evacuating at someone's house and waiting to get home or to a public restroom. Story 25. Probably about 100 or so in my lifetime so far. Mostly when I was younger from using too much toilet paper. More recent times have been due to poor plumbing that refuses to take the smallest amount of toilet paper. It has never clogged with just waste. Story 26. I have clogged the toilet once that I am sure of. However, I have discovered it has clogged a few times, probably 4 times in addition to that one. I cannot say if it was me or the person before me. Story 27. Too many. I remember I once clogged a toilet in a bathroom in Narita Airport, and it overflowed all over the floor. I clogged one at my ex's parents' place too and broke their toilet paper holder while trying to fix it. I have clogged many hotel toilets as well. I should probably flush more often. Story 28. When I was very young and had just learned how to wipe myself, I simply used too much paper per wipe, and that was the problem. Story 29. I do not remember the number, but as someone with irritable bowel syndrome, a bidet and higher quality toilet paper work wonders at preventing it. Story 30. It used to happen quite a few times when we moved into our house. We replaced the toilet, and it has not clogged since. Story 31. Once I had a bowel movement the size of a baseball. I literally had to use the plunger to break it up and get it to go down the toilet. Thankfully, it was my own toilet because that would have been embarrassing. Story 32. Reading all these comments disappoints me. You all need to take better care of your health, especially your digestive tract. Story 33. I used to clog them all the time. Then I moved, and I have not clogged one since. I hope I never clog one again. Story 34. Twice, once on an oil rig, not realizing how utterly ineffective the flushing system was on this particular platform. And once in primary school in the 1990s. The tractor had just been around cutting the grass on the playing field, but it did not collect the grass. So my friends and I decided to do the school a favor and get rid of all the cuttings. We spent the entire lunch break bundling as much grass as we could into our jumpers and sneaking it into the toilets. The clogging was inevitable. Story 35. My best effort was when I was about 7, and the toilet actually overflowed. At the time, I thought it was coming out sideways. That thing was like King Kong's finger. Story 36. Once, on my way to a festival, I asked in a small coffee shop if I could use the toilet. I had one of the biggest bowel movements in my life due to holding it in for hours. I spent about 20 minutes in there. When I wanted to flush, only water rose. I freaked out and decided to leave immediately. I still remember the lady from the coffee shop yelling at me as I was getting out of there. Story 37. Once, it was bad enough that wastewater came back up out of the shower drain, and I had to call a plumber after a day of trying to unclog it. After thoroughly scrubbing the shower and everywhere else I touched that day, I took probably the most enjoyable shower of my life. I felt absolutely disgusting. Story 38. It is an honor to clog a toilet. That means your bowel movement was one the porcelain gods could not contain. It is a rite of passage. Story 39. A few, but they were inferior toilets. I never clogged one at work. They have high-pressure flushes. Story 40. My wife clogged the toilet once, then went shopping for a few hours. When she came back, water was pouring out from between the foundation and the brick walls. Our entire first floor had to be redone. Story 41. Twice. Once in my own home and once at a family member's house. That was when I was a kid, and I did not tell anyone except my mother later when we got home. Story 42. Probably too many. My 3-year-old has been dropping potato-sized dumps for a while now, and a few of them I've tried to flush. The toilet got clogged, and then I'm in there trying to plunge it while swearing at myself, thinking, should have just thrown it in the diaper bin. On the upside, the sewer lines in my neighborhood were recently replaced. Talking to one of the construction workers, he said the original design of the septic system when this neighborhood was developed in the 1950s was really awful. It wasn't uncommon to see sewage trucks stopped at a neighbor's house regularly. They've already finished, and our toilet now flushes with more water and power, but I'm still wary to test it out with one of my little one's mighty mega poops. Story 43. Haha, quite a few. After having some bad fish once on vacation, there was no plunger. I had to get my girlfriend to go to Walmart and buy one. Story 44. I live in a country with better plumbing than many other countries. Yes, there are differences. I have never clogged a toilet. Story 45. Ooh, this one's fun for me. I have a condition called megacolon. Basically, my colon is twice the size of a normal colon. With that added size comes added volume. Unfortunately, it also increases diameter. Sometimes it's due to the sheer volume, sometimes because it's bigger around than the hole at the bottom of the toilet. Either way, I clog the toilet every single time I have a bowel movement. If unclogging toilets ever becomes an Olympic sport, I am taking gold. Story 46. Too many times to count. I grew up in a house with early low-flow toilets that clogged easily. We wore out multiple plungers. Story 47. Way too many to count. Yes, I am ashamed. I am happy modern toilets have stronger flushing than the ones from the 1990s to 2000s. Story 48. Twice. Both times were on the same holiday in the United States. The lowest amount from my family. I still don't know how the plumbing can be that bad. Story 49. I have only clogged a toilet once, and I have large bowel movements. The key is to flush before wiping. Feces combined with toilet paper is what causes clogs almost all the time. Story 50. Why is this a common experience for everyone here? This happened exactly once in my life after I had digestion issues for multiple days. I am now worried for all of you. Story 51. My building is over 100 years old, and I do not think the pipes have ever been replaced. Sometimes it clogs on the courtesy flush. I live alone, so the courtesy flush is only for the toilet itself. Story 52. A lot. Iron gut, but lazy colon. I am on fiber and laxative supplements. Otherwise, my logs will plug a sewer line. Story 53. Dozens of times. As an aside, who does not keep a plunger in their bathroom? Clogging a toilet at someone else's house is already bad enough, but not being able to fix it yourself is much worse. Story 54. Sometimes it is just a poor quality toilet. That and the thick toilet paper is all it takes sometimes. Story 55. I always flush before I wipe now. I flush as many times as needed depending on the wiping situation. Story 56. The largest fossilized feces in history is on display at the Jorvik Viking Center. It dates back to the 9th century and measures 20 centimeters, 8 inches, in length and 5 centimeters, 2 inches, in diameter. Story 57. Enough to be proud of and enough to purchase the poop knife. Story 58. I have 2 comments. 1. The pinned comment that starts, "Since you people like to delete your posts," has never been more appropriate. 2. I have no idea of the total count, but we replaced an older toilet with one that used a lot less water, and I was worried about the result, but it is much better. I think I clogged it once in the last decade, whereas I used to have trouble with that much more often. You can consider me impressed by how well engineers can solve a problem when given time and money to refine their solutions. Story 59. Twice. Oh wait, I thought the question was how many times today. In my life, do numbers go that high? Story 60. More often than not, but only at home. I need to get around to upgrading the toilet as I have not once clogged a public restroom. Story 61. So many times, a plunger beside the toilet is standard equipment in my home. It sits right next to the toilet brush. Story 62. Australian here. The only toilet I ever clogged was when I was visiting the United States. I think you people just need better plumbing, honestly. Story 63. The better question is, what was the worst place you clogged a toilet without a plunger? I'll start. The first time visiting a girl's home on a 3rd date. Story 64. The house I lived in had a toilet that wasn't able to handle the waste I produced sometimes, and they weren't particularly large. The force of the water flushing from the tank wasn't enough to clear everything, so I had to fill a bucket with water and pour that in. Usually that did the trick. Once we changed the toilet, we didn't have that problem anymore, but it took years because we were poor and only did it when we renovated the whole bathroom. We had other priorities, and filling the bucket usually solved the problem, so it wasn't urgent. Toilets now are better made to handle volume and are more efficient with water, requiring less water and fewer flushes to clear everything. So I don't really have a solid number, but it was definitely close to 100. Story 65. I haven't done it in a month or so, but I moved into a new apartment, and the toilet bowl is quite small, so waste hardly goes down. Story 66. Not very often. When I knew it was because I put too much paper in at a time, so I also try to do less at a time. Story 67. Ever since the government mandated energy-efficient 1.6 to 2.0 gallons per flush toilets for homes, I am surprised when I do not clog them. To make it worse, toilets use very thin water lines, so it takes minutes to refill each time, and it usually requires 3 or more flushes. Story 68. Too many before I realized that I could hold the handle down to flush harder. Since then, none. Story 69. As someone using a glucagon-like peptide-1 receptor agonist causing constipation and living in an old house with old plumbing, I experience this at least twice a week. It is very frustrating. I use a bidet, so my toilet paper use is minimal. Story 70. Anyone who says they have never clogged a toilet is lying. They are either so constipated or fiber-starved that they cannot produce proper bowel movements. Story 71. I snuck into my girlfriend's place and spent the night. I clogged the toilet in the morning. Funny thing is, she lived with her grandparents. I spent an hour trying to fix it. I used the scrubber to push it and I used soap. Finally, my girlfriend said just go home. Her grandfather literally got a hanger and tried to clear it. Literally everyone in the family, mom, cousin, grandfather, got involved. It was so embarrassing. That's how I met everyone. I came back later with a plunger, and they said they fixed it. They had a plunger, and I tried that initially, but I guess there are different types of plungers. The one I used and they had in the bathroom was a sink plunger, so I was essentially making something like mashed potatoes. They had to buy a plumber's snake. Story 72. It used to happen every other day. Then I started flushing between wipes, and now it happens every few weeks. Story 73. Like 2 or 3 times. But that was because I was used to using cheap toilet paper. When I switched to thicker paper, that is when the clogs happened. Story 74. I never experienced it myself, But many years ago at work, I witnessed the aftermath of a colleague's bowel movement. He was thicker than a baby's arm and about 2 feet long. He was so proud that he called several of us into the restroom to show it. Story 75 reminds me of a public restroom with no toilet brush. There was a large stool that reached the bottom and pinched off just under the seat. It refused to be flushed, so I had to leave it. Story 76. Twice. The last time was about 6 months ago on a flight to London. I deeply apologized to the cabin crew, but I also think the toilet was broken because how does one clog an airplane toilet? Story 77. It happened 6 times last month. I think my daughter flushed something that did not quite go down because the problem went away, but my bowel movements stayed the same. Story 78. At least 5 times. Once, it was the first thing I did when I arrived at my host family's place on the school exchange program. On another occasion, my brother and I managed to clog both toilets in my stepfather's house on the same morning. Story 79. Learn too late in life not to panic and to first twist off the water valve. This solves about 90% of trial anxiety. Then it is just you and your poor diet habits fighting it out. It is one of those fight or flight situations depending on where you are. The last time was about 10 years ago in a 1930s Boston 3-decker house that was not designed for today's person. Neither were the stairways or door frames. Was everyone under 5 feet tall? Story 80. Depends. Sometimes it is like the Chris Pratt marker joke. Just keep wiping because it is somehow still there. Story 81. I'll be honest. I've never counted. After I read this post, I now have to use the restroom. So if it clogs, it is your fault, original poster. Just kidding, my friend. Not about having to use the restroom. I really have to do that. Story 82. I use flushable wipes, which means I do not have to use excessive toilet paper for each bowel movement that leaves marks. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.